We've all felt that pressure, You
Yeah.
walk into a meeting, a negotiation, or even just look at a career ladder, and the default setting in the modern world is, well, it's often survival of the fittest.
Mm.
It's this feeling that success is a fixed zero-sum game. For you to win, someone else has to lose.
Oh, absolutely. That worldview is it's deeply ingrained in us. We're taught to see the world as a system of scarcity, where resources, opportunities, even happiness, they're all limited. So competition in that model becomes the primary and often, aggressive way of interacting.
Right, and while that competitive drive,
Hmm.
it can fuel short-term wins, for sure. The data just consistently shows that achieving your own success at the expense of others, it breeds long-term resentment, isolation, and ultimately instability. You might win the battle, but you could lose the war for everyone to flourish together.
It creates a system that requires constant defense. I mean, think about it. If your victory depends on my defeat, I'm not spending my time creating new value. I'm spending it figuring out how to stop you.
Exactly. And that's why we're doing this deep dive today. Our mission is to explore a radically different path, a more liberating path to success and synergy, one that's offered by ancient Buddhist wisdom. We're looking for the practical tools,
Mhm.
the philosophical and psychological shifts that can move us into a genuine win-win mindset. You want to figure out how to make the pie bigger, not just fight over the same old slices.
And that journey really begins with a concept that completely dismantles the zero-sum myth. It's called interbeing.
Interbeing,
Okay.
I'd say. So we tend to think of ourselves as separate entities, right? Like
Yeah.
separate islands all competing for the same bit of land. Interbeing seems to challenge that fundamental separation. How can you frame that for us in a way that goes beyond, maybe, the purely spiritual?
Well, you can think of it as systems thinking, but applied to human existence. Interbeing, it's a translation of the Vietnamese tipien. It literally means that to be is to interbe. We aren't separate. We are all interconnected parts of one inseparable system. So when you look at a flower, you're not just seeing a flower. You're seeing the sun, the rain, the soil, the seed. The flower just cannot exist independently of those things. And you, as a listener, you can't exist independently of your team, your supply chain, your customers, your community. It's all connected.
Okay, so let me put that into a concrete example.
Mhm.
I'm in a corporate negotiation, and I drive an unrealistically hard bargain. I crush my supplier's profit margins, and I feel like I've won for the quarter.
Mm.
What's the systemic consequence of that isolated victory?
The consequence is instability. And that instability always, always cycles back to you. If the supplier is crippled, their quality drops.
Headlines get missed.
They miss deadlines, or they eventually just collapse, which forces you to find a new, probably more expensive vendor. You introduce harm into the system, and that harm is now an active variable in your own success calculation. Interbeing teaches that if you hurt another part of the system to win, you are, by definition, just introducing fragility into your own foundation.
So the real takeaway here isn't that we should just be nice for the sake of it. It's that it is an undeniable systemic reality that our well-being is intrinsically linked to everyone else's. We have to stop seeing success as taking a piece of the pie and realize that on a really fundamental level, we are the pie. And the only way to get a bigger slice is to make the entire pie grow.
Exactly. And that shift from isolation to interdependence is crucial, but it requires a very specific psychological tool to actually activate it. Because intellectually understanding interbeing is one thing. Feeling it in your gut when your biggest rival lands a huge client, that's another thing entirely.
Huh, right. That flicker of jealousy or comparison we feel, that's the zero-sum conditioning kicking right in. So what's the tool? What do we need to emotionally connect with the success of other people?
That is the practice of mudita. It's often translated as sympathetic joy. And it is the deliberate, active practice of finding genuine, unadulterated happiness in the success and good fortune of others. This is a profound and a really radical psychological muscle that we have to build.
I can honestly say this is the hardest concept for most people. I mean, we're so trained to compare. If my colleague gets the promotion, the first thought is almost always, why wasn't it me? What did I do wrong?
Right.
How does Mudita actively rewire that response?
Well, that comparative thought is driven by the ego, which sees success as this finite resource. Mudita completely dismantles that scarcity model. When you practice rejoicing in your peers' achievement, truly celebrating it, you're sending a biological and psychological signal to your brain. A signal that says success is possible and that success is good news for the system I belong to. You dissolve the tension in that threat response.
So instead of being a threat, their success literally becomes proof of concept for my own potential. It turns a competitive relationship into an aspirational one.
Precisely. You shift from thinking, they took my chance, to thinking, their success illuminates a pathway for our entire team. And this creates the necessary internal safety to start looking for solutions where both parties genuinely flourish rather than, settling for some unhappy compromise.
That transition from the abstract idea of interbeing to the actual practice of mudita makes perfect sense. But let's be realistic. That flicker of jealousy is powerful. What's the fundamental barrier that stops us from practicing mudita consistently? What is the architect of that competitive isolation?
We have to confront the ultimate source of that suffering, the ego, or as it's known in the Buddhist tradition, ahamkara.
Ahamkara, that sounds intense. What does it look like in a modern professional context?
Ahamkara literally means I-making. It is the mental machinery that continuously constructs and reinforces the sense of a fixed, separate, permanent self. In the workplace, ahamkara shows up as the need to be right, the obsession with getting explicit credit, the defensiveness when your ideas are challenged.
The turf wars between teams.
Exactly. The ego demands definition, hierarchy, and validation. It wants to be the star, and if it can't be the star, it would honestly prefer to sabotage the whole play.
Wow, that is incredibly relatable. When I feel that intense need to correct someone mid-sentence, or when a piece of critical feedback instantly triggers a defensive story in my head, that's ahamkara at work, defining I against them.
Absolutely. And the Buddhist teaching is that this idea of a fixed, isolated, and permanent I is the grandest of all illusions. Our identity is dynamic, it's interconnected, it's constantly changing, yet we cling to this solid identity because it feels safe. But it's this clinging that makes us so vulnerable to competition and prevents real synergy. So if the ego is the barrier, how do we dismantle it enough to allow for true synergy? Especially when deadlines are tight and the pressure is on.
The key is mindful observation. We have to learn to catch our ego in the act. Yeah. The moment you feel that defensiveness rising or that urge to aggressively assert your point, that's your cue. The solution is to intentionally set aside all the labels, your title, your history, your expectations, and approach the situation with what's called a beginner's mind.
The beginner's mind, as in approaching the problem as if I know nothing about it or about the people involved.
Exactly that. It means clearing the slate. If you assume you already know the solution or you assume you already know what the other department head is going to say, your ego has already taken control. The beginner's mind is pure curiosity. It frees you from the need to be right, and it opens up the cognitive space for something new. If you're not attached to your solution, you can actually collaborate on creating a much better one. That linkage is so practical. Taming the ego is the absolute prerequisite for achieving any external synergy. If I can set aside my need for personal credit, I can actually focus entirely on the quality of the outcome.
Which brings us directly to the environment required for this collaborative spirit to thrive. The Sangha.
Traditionally, the Sangha is the monastic community. But when we're talking about synergy and the win-win mindset, we're talking about creating an environment of collective wisdom. How do we translate that into a modern workplace, especially with remote or distributed teams?
Well, the Sangha represents the realization that true synergy isn't just about teamwork. It's about exponential creation. Synergy is achieved when the outcome is genuinely qualitatively greater than the sum of the individual parts. To create a modern Sangha, we have to recognize that we are like cells in the same body. We might have different functions, marketing, finance, product development, but we all share the same lifeblood, the health of the organization.
Okay, so if the health of the organization is the goal, how do we get those cells to work together transparently and without that fear of exposure or blame? Because fear is the absolute enemy of synergy.
It requires a relentless focus on communication and psychological safety. And the specific tool here is the practice of right speech. Right speech is often misunderstood as just being nice. It's far, far deeper than that. It's about ensuring that your speech is timely, truthful, and critically benevolent in its intent. You have to speak to build up, not to tear down or manipulate.
So using right speech means if I have a critique, I frame it as an observation aimed at collective improvement, not an accusation aimed at individual failure.
Precisely. And when a team commits to that kind of transparency and benevolence, something fascinating happens. Much of the conflict just dissolves. We often realize that the disagreements we're having are just surface-level misunderstandings of much deeper shared human needs or organizational needs. We were both trying to secure the project's future, but our egos were just attached to different methods for achieving it. When you align your intent through right speech, The win-win path suddenly becomes visible.
Okay, so we've covered the philosophy of connection with interbeing, the psychological activation with mudita, the main obstacle, ahamkara, and the environment, sangha. Now, let's get down to brass tacks. I'm in a difficult, tense meeting right now. What are the immediate actionable tools I could use to apply this wisdom and shift the dynamic?
The first and most powerful immediate tool is the profound act of deep listening.
Which, in the source material, relates to sunyata, or emptiness. How do I empty myself of my own narrative in a high-stakes conversation?
Sunyata, in this context, is emptying yourself of the need to respond. It means clearing your mental space of your internal rebuttal script, your pre-planned defense, your judgments about the person speaking. Instead of preparing your counterargument, you are genuinely holding space for the other person's perspective. You're listening not to reply, but to truly understand what they're trying to protect or what they're trying to achieve.
That is a massive mental shift. You stop seeing an adversary who needs to be defeated, and you start seeing a teacher who holds critical information you need to solve the puzzle.
It changes everything. When you practice deep listening, you validate the other person's reality, which immediately lowers their defenses. And when defenses are low, the confrontation stops being a battle of wills, my way versus your way, and it starts becoming a moment of co-creation. You are now jointly creating a third, often radically better outcome that neither of you had considered alone.
That process of co-creation sounds like the path to the middle way finding, a solution that moves forward without attachment to either extreme position.
It is the ultimate embodiment of the middle way. It's a beneficial solution that respects the needs and reality of everyone involved, and it comes from realizing that there is almost always a more expansive solution available than the two options currently on the table.
Let's talk about the emotional safety required for that. Deep listening gets you the information. But what tool generates the trust needed for people to take risks and genuinely put their best, most vulnerable ideas out there?
That is where the active generation of compassion comes in. It's called metta, or loving kindness. Metta isn't a passive feeling. It is an active state of wishing well-being on others. When you treat every person you interact with, even the ones who seem difficult or obstructive, with genuine respect and metta, you create a high-vibration environment.
A high-vibration environment where people feel safe. And when they feel safe, I imagine they're much more likely to contribute their most creative, innovative ideas instead of holding back out of fear of being judged.
Exactly. Metta ensures that even when conflict arises, which it inevitably will, it's processed not as a personal attack, but as an opportunity for the sangha, for the whole group, to learn and grow collectively. It's the emotional glue that holds the entire win-win mindset together.
This whole framework, when you really put it all together, it completely dismantles the zero-sum myth. It replaces scarcity with this powerful sense of exponential abundance.
And that is perfectly captured by that powerful metaphor of the candle. Think of it. Thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness, knowledge, success, they are not finite resources. They don't decrease by being shared, they only multiply their total light.
I find that so deeply comforting and profoundly true. If you, the listener, need a lasting image for interbeing and synergy in action, we have the example of the forest. It appears competitive on the surface, right? Every tree is reaching for the sun.
But underneath the soil, the roots tell the real story. The forest floor is this complex, connected network. The trees share nutrients with struggling neighbors through these fungal networks. They send chemical warnings about drought or incoming pests across the entire system. They are not competing against each other for the forest's health. They are growing together to maximize the resilience, the strength, and the longevity of the entire sanctuary.
That image of shared roots, sharing resources and warnings for the benefit of the whole, that is the lasting image we want to leave you with. This deep dive was all about replacing that ingrained, isolated view of success with a collaborative, exponential one.
So remember these key principles as you navigate your professional life. Recognize the systemic reality of interbeing. If they struggle, eventually you struggle.
Yeah.
Actively cultivate mudita. Genuinely rejoice in the success of others. Turn that threat into an opportunity. And when conflict arises, use deep listening to find that co-created middle way.
Thank you so much for joining us on this profound journey into the architecture of shared success. We really encourage you to apply these principles immediately. Actively look for the win-win today.
And as you go forward and seek those higher-level synergistic outcomes, ask yourself this one provocative thought. What opportunities for co-creation and genuine exponential success might you be missing right now, simply because your ego is attached to being right about the current situation?